Welcome to our improvisational theatre. This is, of course, completely unrehearsed, unwritten, and unintelligible. Nothing is planned. We just ask our audience to call out what you would like us to do. Simply give us a last line, a title, some characters, a theme, a setting, a point of view, a plot, a first line, and some lines in between, and we make up the rest, improvising as we go along. This next minute is completely rehearsed, planned, and calculated. Your reaction to it, however, may be improvised. You are on your own.
Welcome to the Shamley Silhouette, yet another analysis of the master of suspense, Alfred Hitchcock. I am your host, Zach Eastman. We are, plugging away as usual. I keep saying that in the recent episodes that I've been recording, but I do mean it. We're keeping going. We're not going to let anything stop us. Not a pandemic. Nothing. Nothing is going to stop the Shamley Silhouette from continuing its mission. Although I do want to point out, as the Shamley Silhouette draws to a close on the subject of Alfred Hitchcock and transforms itself into its new entity, that will be announced sometime in September, I do want to point out that we in the podcasting world have been seeing what's been going on over the course of the past weeks, not just in this country, but also just everything that's been going on. And one of the things that this show has been able to do is talk about the subject of Golden Age Hollywood in an entertaining and hopefully informative manner to the best of the ability that I'm able to. However, I'm also aware that as this show plugs along in different forms and entities, it is going to be up to me and whoever else I have on board to try to tackle subjects about the Golden Age of Hollywood that may not be comfortable to those who like to remember it fondly. Obviously, we are dealing with a situation where we need to improve as a society beyond the abilities that we thought we had accomplished years ago. And one of the ways that this can be accomplished will be addressing the history of not just us as people, but also us as entertainers and creatives. And there's a lot of history within Hollywood that is not pretty to look at, but it needs to be looked at to talk about the sins as well as the triumphs of this period and to fully understand it in context. So then that way, when we watch films of this era, we are not just blindly watching for entertainment, we are also learning. Because as silly as it's going to sound out of my mouth, it's intelligent thinking. But enough of the soapbox. I'm going to step off that one for now and get on another soapbox. The soapbox of the theater, the stage world. And I speak of a film from 1950 that Alfred Hitchcock directed with some of the most over-the-top and crazy talents you could possibly have in a movie. And also the very theme of theater and extravagant acting itself. I speak, of course, of 1950's Stage Fright. Now, here to bring this discussion into the limelight, if you will. No, don't make that joke, Zach. Anyway, I brought on a return guest. You listened to his dulcet tones speak intelligently and wisely about Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds not too long ago. And I brought him on here not just because he is an intelligent and analytical fella, but the movie has fright in the title. So we've got to talk to one of the co-hosts of Punk Rock Horror Podcast, Matt McCord, a.k.a. TheUndeadMatt.
Hi there. Thank you for the intro. Cody sends his love and is deeply, deeply sorry that he cannot be here. And then wants everyone who is a ghoul, gal, or creeper moon from our show to know that he's very sorry. And anyone else who is looking forward to him coming on too, he's very sorry. But thank you for having me on, and thank you for introing me like that. I'm glad my analyzing skills are actually more of a testament to my intelligence than it is to me being nitpicky.
There are days when I'll go back to other episodes of the show, mainly just to find out audio quality and what I can do better in the post room, because I'm still learning at this like anybody else is. But the one episode I'll go back to more often than not, other than the Huntley Haverstock episode, is the birds episode, because when we get into the middle section, when we're talking about the birds attacking, and just listening to the diatribes and discussions of not just that movie, but also what would happen if a bird actually flipped Hitchcock off on set, just tickle me to no end.
I'm glad. And real quick, I know you, with respect to you, I know you did say you wanted to step off your soapbox, but if I could kind of just like prop you up on it one more time, I think it's really, really great what you said, how you approached everything that's happening in the world right now. You know, as a fellow entertainer, I also struggled with, what is our, where do we stand with everything? What should we say? Because when people are coming to, our show and your show especially, it's to hear about film. It's to learn about the history of it, and to have, that type of, very kind of like brain food type of entertaining escape. And that escape is usually kind of like stigmatized as like a negative thing with not facing anything. Where we're here to talk about film. Obviously, we're gonna have to touch about some of the ugly parts of history, but we're gonna approach it with an honest light. And if anything, I honestly think that gives you far more credit, the fact that you are going to be honest about it when it's appropriate and is needed for it. So I'm just basically saying that I applaud you for saying that. So good job, sir. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I do appreciate that sentiment. On my end, it's one thing to say you know something; it's another thing to fully understand what's been going on. And I will point out that, like, one of the things that we are able to do with the respective shows that we have is to talk about the different angles of the industry beyond just our love of the story, the actors, the plot, the characters, etc. There's a history behind a lot of these things in various different forms that needs to be addressed. But I will point out for listeners of the Shamley Silhouette, and also anybody who is on the punk rock horror podcast scene, if you're already a listener, you already know this, but episode 115 that you guys did, A Moment of Silence, was one of the finest podcasts I listened to within the month. And obviously this show will be coming out in July or August, but if you can go back and listen to what Matt and Cody did chatting about the blaxploitation and African American horror films, I think you will find that my intro to Matt up front was not unwarranted at all whatsoever, and that goes for Cody as well, because you guys were talking about an angle on cinema that has thankfully gotten a lot more exposure over the years thanks to Get Out. And if you haven't watched the Shudder documentary Horror Noir, which goes into greater detail on it for like 2 hours. But yeah, this is a subject that's not going to go away. And if anything, as we get further into different topics, it's going to come up more and it's going to be addressed. And it's not even going to just be with the issue of racism in the industry. It's also going to be the history of sexism in the industry. And it's also going to be the flat out injustices impended on the gay community and the LGBTQ community in general.
Well, just to kind of like end on what you're saying, because I do want to talk about the film too, and I want to talk about Stage Fright and Hitchcock some more. But risking a little bit here on the soapboxes, when it comes to racism in this country, it's very systemic in how it's been taught to us and how we were educated in schools. And so with you coming on here and not hiding away the obvious racism, sexism, and homophobic tendencies, and more so that Hollywood has cleverly hid away, and you bring a light to that, end of the day will always make you an ally, because we lived in a society for so long that has hid that part of history so well and has kept a veil over it for so long. You know, it's knowledge is a very beautiful thing, and I will always encourage everyone to seek it out and seek the right knowledge. And again, sir, in my eyes, you are an ally. So that is just my opinion. So,
well, that does my heart good, and if anybody wants to tell me that I'm wrong about wanting to bring these issues to the forefront, I will. I mean, I don't know if I'd have an answer to that other than "Go fuck yourself." I'm Hitchcock, the genius. No,
you are too kind, sir. You are far too kind and too humble. But let's jump into it. Let's talk about Stage Fright, man.
We are coming back to me. Now, really quickly before we jump into Stage Fright. Now, I brought you into this episode initially because I was being cheeky and going like, well, I'll get the horror guys to talk about a movie with the word fright in the title. But to be honest, one of the things that we can talk about this film in advance is that it's a bit of a genre mashup, not too dissimilar from other Hitchcock films, but it's very, very in keeping with an Inner Sanctum mystery of the era, like similar to the radio show Inner Sanctum, where it's darker than usual, or at least it feels that way as such. Now, the film gets criticism as being a more lighthearted affair, but rewatching it, especially for this series, and as late as today, there's a feeling throughout the film of just like something like terribly dark and macabre overhanging the entire thing in a way like there's very little levity because everybody's kind of placed in a tale of suspense within the larger suspense of the film. Now, you talked about in the last time you came on the show about the things that qualify as a horror movie. So I'll ask you in regards to this, having watched it, would you consider this, if not at the very least a horror film, then a kind of a horror mashup? Because that's the kind of tone I got out of it.
The thing about what qualifies as horror that I've also should have prefaced the last time is that it has changed dramatically throughout time. So, I mean, today, for example, today's modern age, when we think horror, the first thought is always going to be, I like to use an example of witches falling on broomsticks, spiders, blood guts, somebody killing someone. Now there's ghosts involved, possessing things. Now there's who done it. Now things like mental health are being touched on a little more, and so there's all these added layers that are added to modern horror that, in some ways, not only accents it, but also really does a good job at kind of making you really question what is actually horror. I mean, I could go back and make the case to you that movies like The Black Cauldron are legit, a horror movie, but a horror movie for kids. And that's because of a lot of themes and how they incorporate their tale. Now, talking about Stage Fright, I feel so, because I did additional research on this movie because I actually didn't know a lot about it, so I wanted to do more research on it than just watching it. And so reading through it, kind of finding out that at the time that Hitchcock himself was kind of coming away from the failure of I think it was Under the Red Capricorn.
Under Capricorn and Rope too. So I had a double hitter of bad luck, Matt. It was pretty shitty. I just don't know what happened. Who didn't want to watch a movie about Jimmy Stewart throwing his beliefs under the bus in the last 5 minutes? I just don't understand.
Well, so what's interesting about the film, though, is that you can tell he's trying to go and use more of, he's trying to tap more into his theater side of telling stories, and keeping in mind that this was like a co-written, adapted screenplay from a novel with him and his wife, that I guess plays into it a little bit too. But there's certain scenes that, like, I don't want to spoil anything as we discuss it, but there are certain scenes in this movie that you would mostly see in like a psychological horror film. So if it's okay for the scene I'm going to talk about in particular is when oh man, I'm forgetting his name, but the gentleman who is hiding
Jonathan Cooper. Yes, we'll give his name up front. Yes.
Yeah, so he's in a conversation with, and again, I'm bad with names. He's in a conversation with the woman he's working with to kind of get his name cleared.
Yes, Eve. Yes, yeah.
So as they're having this conversation, a group walks up to them, and I'm at this point I am purposely like omitting names so you can intro it. But a group walks up to them to talk to Eve, and what happens is that he looks at a white dress. And this blotch appears on the white dress for a moment. And, being used to modern cinema, sometimes black and white just goes right over you. But the scene was actually supposed to be a blood stain on the dress. And it happens for a second. And for how old the film is, it's actually a really impressive effect. I was impressed by it. I thought it was great how they included it. But he just sees the stain appear on this woman's white dress, and then it disappears. And you see similar things like that in modern psychological horror and paranormal horror for the most part. You see when, whether it is somebody who was responsible for killing someone. So, for example, in Hereditary, if you haven't seen the film yet, there's a part where, the brother loses little sister via head being decapitated. And so there's moments where he still thinks she's in the back seat, but without a head, or it's just turned backwards. And so, although a much more extreme way to show that, even back then, 1950s, when, murder was obviously real, touching on it in a film had to be done in this very theatrical way, because audiences would have found it too shocking. I mean, if you put that scene in Hereditary in Stage Fright, and that person got their head ripped off, guaranteed, Alfred Hitchcock would have given everybody an aneurysm.
They would have set the theater on fire. Is what they would have done. They would have, I always make this joke about film and filmmaking in general. And I'll always just point it out, because I like making fun of the rubes who do this, which is and this is not something today, but this is something back in the old days of being the camera's going to steal my soul. It's going to peer into my very essence. These kind of rubes would just flip their shit. And unfortunately, that kind of mentality would have still prevailed into as late as the 90s. But you're right. They were required under the production codes, which would then eventually become the MPAA, which, while I don't like the person who founded the initial forming of the MPAA, they did allow much more than you would have been able to get away with in the Shylock office and the production code, or the Hays Code even. So there is a definite subtlety throughout not just Hitchcock's films, but Golden Age Hollywood films in general, where things have to be alluded to and in essence end up being stronger than any violence you can show on screen. I mean, this is beating a dead horse, but you can go back to Halloween, a film that doesn't have the amount of violence that would be attached to the genre it creates, and arguably works more in a Hitchcock motif than it does in a slasher motif. Now, when you get to the sequels, obviously, it's a completely different story. But so, yeah, you're right that it is interesting that this film in particular, and it's funny because this film, carries a long line of Hitchcock doing this, but this is kind of the last stone he has to step on before he gets into his golden period, where he does eventually make a film like Psycho, and then eventually The Birds, where he's completely opening up the door of good taste. Right. And just saying, frack it.
Oh, sorry, sir. I was just gonna say, to answer your question,
yeah.
I wouldn't really. I don't want to say it's a horror movie by today's standards. What I will say is that it's a pinnacle in horror, just as much as Deep Purple is a pinnacle for metal. The groundwork.
That's a good,
well, and I mean that
great
as a
reference.
Though. Well, it is a compliment though, because Deep Purple is one of the bands that's associated with laying the groundwork of metal until Dio and Sabbath came along and really made it what it is, and made a sound for it. But if you listen to Deep Purple's music, it's very heavy. For back then, it was very heavy. I mean, obviously today it's not going to be heavier than like anything that Cannibal Corpse has ever put out. But
no.
that in mind, if you look at Stage Fright, there's a lot of that similar groundwork. Whether it is the bloodstain scene I just mentioned, or Eve kind of being in the middle of what although in the movie seems like a very kind of like heroic thing, and it is, and it's like it seems easy for her. If we adapted that for now, that would be, and I guess it has kind of been adapted, but point being is that even just being pulled between two different forces of, I have this secret that could ruin me in my entire life, but I want to prove that I can be a fantastic fucking actor, it could be such a draining thing on a person's mentality. I can easily see it being a psychological horror. So I wouldn't. So I guess my statement on it is that it would be a pinnacle into bringing horror into more film acceptance. And obviously, again, with like what you said, following up with Hitchcock bringing up Psycho, and then The Birds kind of cements that even more so. And so on and so forth. Sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to
No. That was the absolute correct thing that needed to be said right now. And when I should point out, when I was mentioning the Inner Sanctum show earlier, and this also extends to things like Suspense and The Whistler. These were radio plays of the era, and Inner Sanctum even had a series of films by Universal where the material always seemed like it's not quite noir. It's trying to tiptoe past noir and into something a lot more obscene, or something a little bit more vile. In the case of Stage Fright, I think what it mainly does is primarily steep itself in the in the ultimate insanity of Marlene Dietrich's character being as selfish and vile as she is, but also into what we'll later find with the spoiler character. And basically how we get it within the last 5 minutes of this movie, it becomes a little bit more of a horror movie than you're expecting. For the majority of it, it plays out as a whodunit. Like, yeah, that's right, I made a fucking mystery movie. Why the fuck not? I can do what Rian Johnson will do 80 years later. Like, so, and this actually has been compared to an Agatha Christie story to a certain extent as well. So we'll find a lot of interesting things to bring up throughout it. But I will point out, this is a movie of suspense that features, amongst other things, an over dramatic villain, which not unlike a Norma Desmond, who would later go on to influence several different over the top horror actress performances that are wonderful to watch. But there's also a creepy doll in this movie that does something terrifying, but not what you'd expect. And there is technically some gothic imagery by the climax, especially when we're dealing with scenes in the theater. But we will go ahead and jump into some production info in this film, because the production info in this film, there isn't a lot of like detailed info like you have with a Psycho or Vertigo, and we've been experiencing this with some of the films. But what there are a bunch of anecdotes, and we're gonna go through them. But I'll go through the credits right now. Directed by me, Mr. Whodunit. I can do this. I can do what everybody else does. Produced by that same guy. Screenplay by Whitfield Cook. With a story by Alma Revel, based on the novel Man Running from 1948 by Selwyn Jepson, which is a great name, by the way, Selwyn Jepson.
It's very unique. You can definitely pick it out of a crowd.
Yeah, Matt, if you have another kid, name it Selwyn Jepson.
I will name it only Selwyn Jepson, and if that kid decides to get his name changed, I'm disowning him entirely.
You'd be like, no, you don't get it. Some jackass in Denver told me to tell you that this is your name.
It's from a podcast. How could you be so disrespectful?
What's a podcast, Daddy? Shut up. But no, yes, Alma Revel. Yes, there's a reason why Alma Revel is important to bring up here, because For a more intelligent breakdown of this production story, listen to The Secret History of Hollywood by Adam Roach, who will be our final guest on the show. But when you're coming off of the failure of Rope and Under Capricorn, and essentially something like Transatlantic Pictures, which is a production company that Hitch and Sidney J. Bernstein founded, failing, the impetus. It is imperative of you to come up with a way to bounce back, especially if you're somebody like Alfred Hitchcock. And so he had constructed a way to basically let's make some films let's set up some films that we know will be successes. They tapped Whitfield Cook to do this. Whitfield Cook was adapting a play initially based off of some books that he had written. And in the play, he had cast Patricia Hitchcock, Hitchcock's daughter, and his talents caught the eye of Hitch and Alma. And, Hitch said, "Hey, come on over to our club." And so they're working on this story based on the Man Running novel. Alma basically writes the story and the scenes along with Hitch. And Whitfield Cook works primarily on the dialogue, along with the additional writing of Ranald McDougall. But so the way this film gets made is very strange, because if you'll recall in what you read, Matt, you have a failure like Under Capricorn. Now, Hitchcock had a deal with Warner Brothers to distribute the Transatlantic Pictures productions, not the least of which was Under Capricorn and Rope. And Hitchcock's lawyer went over the contract for Warner Brothers with Hitchcock and assumedly Transatlantic Pictures. And he called up Hitch one day and said, I've got some good news. They made the deal with you, not with Transatlantic Pictures. And there's still 2 pictures left on the deal. And so Hitchcock goes, I'm gonna play a card here, Mr. Lawyer. I'm gonna play a card so bold and brash that nobody will ever fucking believe it not even if you have this amazing podcast that's being done in Britain years later where they describe it in much greater detail. But no, I'm going to do it. So the summary of that story is he goes in to Jack Warner's office and basically bullshits his way into making this movie because he knew that he had the right to do it, but he didn't want to throw legalese in Warner's face. And Warner bought the bait and was just like, he must have appreciated that approach, because he gave him virtually no interference whatsoever on this movie and coming movies to follow. So that's how the film gets ramped up and started. That's insane. You can't do that today. You can... Yeah. It would behoove you more to make the contract argument and use the legalese than to do what Hitchcock did, which is basically Hitchcock did what Ben Affleck does in that retainer scene in Good Will Hunting. That's what we've got here. So, nevertheless, they get this film off the ground. Hitchcock basically casts this film to basically be marketable. He needs a hit to justify anything else he wants to do down the line. So he casts, amongst other people, the cast of this film is stacked with not only acting legends, but also British character actor legends. So the cast of this film is Jane Wyman, Marlene Dietrich, Michael Wilding, Richard Todd, Alistair Sim, Kay Walsh, Sybil Thorndike, Joyce Grenfell, and Patricia Hitchcock playing a character that you probably don't notice in the film, but it's there. It's Chubby Bannister. That's an unfortunate... I'm sorry. It wasn't to insult my daughter. It's just that was the name. And we had... Oh, no. I'm going to hell, aren't I, Matt? I'm going to parent hell.
I think I am too. That's definitely a name I used to call myself at some
Chubby
point. And you know what? We're just going to leave it at that.
Before I did Punk Rock Horror Podcast, my name was Chubby Bannister, and I ran a vaudeville tour across the Midwest.
I had a porn career. It was short-lived. It did not go well. Yeah. You know what? No one really wanted to hire a guy named Chubby chubby for a first name to be one, and then Bannister. It just wasn't great. So I'm glad to know that.
It intimated depression and stares, and those are things that people didn't want in their porns at the time. So but yeah, this cast is fucking stacked. Excuse me. And Jane Wyman's casting in particular, she had just come off of an Oscar for the film Johnny Belinda, and she was a very well-known actress of the late period. She started off mainly doing comedic roles, but then she got into films like The Yearling and Johnny Belinda that kind of elevated her to a different plane. Jane Wyman was also married at one point to a certain actor who did movies with monkeys before he would go on to lead the country from 1980 to 1988. And I speak, of course, of Ronald. Mary, where's the rest of me? I'm sorry, Ronald. Where's the rest of me? Reagan. So she was married to Reagan, and they were getting a divorce at the time that she got a call to make this movie. So Hitchcock called her up and basically said, "Hey, you want to come make a movie out in Britain?" She goes, "Yeah, I'm divorcing Reagan. I'll do anything to get out of the country right now."
Get out of the country.
Yeah, anything. Yeah. And he's just like, why doesn't he want? Why doesn't he want me, Jane? Is it just because I'm divorcing you? Why was he one? Fuck it. He's a communist. They're all communists. It doesn't fucking matter anymore.
Without backtracking like too hard, can I also say that it's like one thing that I also found really interesting is that Hitchcock kind of was really big for just like having his like go-to group of people that he put in all his films, and this one was definitely like weird based on how it was received via that, because there are some film critics who really believe that the film isn't as great as it ever was because just some of the characters do not mix well because they've never really acted too much in the same room together, whereas it's some like you in particular, Zach, like applaud it for that, because then it's forcing these actors to really work outside of a actual comfort zone.
Yeah. Well, and also keep in mind, if we think about horror films today, or even let's go back 20 years ago to the 90s, where you had a sometimes if it was made by a studio, you'd stack a cast with people who were hot on the scene, and they clearly don't mesh well with each other. Now, sometimes you get a good result out of it. Like, I argue The Faculty, in addition to obviously Scream, pulls it off nicely because the chemistry ends up working. But if you're sticking all the talents that you are into something like the House on Haunted Hill remake, it doesn't always work. There are good things about that movie, but the ensemble is not necessarily one of them. And right. I think that in this particular case with Stage Fright, you have a lot of people that Hitchcock, one, had never worked with, apart from Pat Hitchcock, but two, people that it's almost kind of like a blender cast to a certain extent, because everybody fits their role fine. It's just that it feels off somehow because you don't have anything tangible to hold on to in the Hitch connection. Right. The thing that you would have to go on for is the theme, the tone, and the camera work of the movie to obviously suggest that this is a movie by me. I mean, I can shoot it pretty. It doesn't matter who I put in the fucking frame. Like, I know how to fucking shoot it. So, you've got Jane Wyman in the film basically playing a mouseier character. And then on the complete opposite end, you have eternal badass Marlene Dietrich. If anybody does not know who Marlene Dietrich is, but has seen Blazing Saddles and knows of the Bavarian bombshell herself, Lily von Stoop, then you know who Marlene Dietrich essentially is as a screen presence. She was an actress who came from Berlin, who basically got a contract with Paramount after a film called The Blue Angel in 1930, which brought her acclaim. And she starred in many films, not the least of which is her work with von Sternberg with films like Morocco, Shanghai Express. And she was she had a way of delivering it that was both sultry and sexy, but also felt like you were wasting her time. And I'm sure, as you saw in this film, Matt, she does not want to be bothered by anybody.
I know, like I'm just like, wow, gee, I guess I figured out where every overdramatic person in my life, got their inspiration from. For real though, like I did kind of like enjoy it, the way she made her character, because it felt really kind of like silly in a way, like not silly like as in like it ruined the quality of the film in any sort of way, but it's just like it was definitely just like very diva-esque. She did it perfectly. It felt right at home. Just like, oh God, I don't know what I'm gonna do.
Yeah. Well,
like,
I will tell you, like Dietrich. Every time I've watched Dietrich, I'm amazed by how much she pulls off. Because it's not that she plays the same character each time, but there are obviously, like any actor in Golden Age Hollywood, traits that carry over. Obviously, a good musical number by Cole Porter in here is a throwback to every other time she's had to sing on film. And, her ability to hold herself up and basically be, I know I described her early on as like her vile and wicked, plot in this movie. But the truth is that the character plays it with a little bit of an independence. Now, albeit it's through the lens, the very outdated lens of a woman who can't be trusted, or a greedy woman who only who only thinks of herself, and that diva element that you're talking about. But there is an air of independence going like, I kind of want Marlene Dietrich to get away with it. I don't know what that says about me, but I'm like, go for it, girl. Like, you're right. Do it. Like, play these men for fools.
It's not even just because of like, I think the reason that you want her to kind of like get away with it isn't really because like she's, I guess what I'm trying to say is like, because it's conflicted, right? Because she's like, is the villain, she's over dramatic, why would you want Cruella de Vil to win? But in this case, it's not Cruella de Vil. Like, she was really good at being this diva, but keeping the human quality of why she's a diva. Like, you can't, like, in more or less terms, you relate to her because, she kind of realizes that in some facets that she feels like she was alone in the world that she was born in for so long. And so you might as well be extra special. You might as well act how special you feel you actually are, And so she realized kind of her value, what it is. And I guess where the horror would kind of fit in on that is that she valued her so much that she's willing to just sacrifice her own character for her own salvation, and I think in some facets, although I'd like to think, everybody listening hasn't like lied about him, a murder or what have you. But I think in some facets, we all wish to kind of protect ourselves in that way when we've had, I mean, without getting like so like, gushy and what, over the top about it, but just like, I think we've all related in some facet like that of, knowing who we are and wanting to self-survive regardless of everyone else and regardless of, the accusations against us, like this is just something that she can overcome and she knows she'll be able to overcome because she's already overcome so much. So what's this?
Yeah.
Why is this?
And I'll tell you, like the character as written and as performed by Miss Dietrich, to me, really kind of boils into this element of the person who's lost the ability to understand what's right and what's wrong, within the scope of like, well, yes, it's wrong, but it's right for me. And so they confluence the two. And we'll get to it when we get to the plot synopsis. By the time we get to the end, there's a scene, her last scene in the movie is appropriately described by Peter Bogdanovich as strange. And yet I feel like it says the most about the character that you ever hear in the movie. And it weirdly kind of breaks down a character that Dietrich has played before and would continue to play. But we'll jump right into it with this plot because there's a lot to go over, not the least of which would be, amongst other things, the inherent plot of this film. Because as we were talking earlier about the whole elements of horror in this film, Matt, we'll talk about it at some point, but there's another horror franchise that you could allude to with this film, but we can't talk about it now because that would be a spoiler. But I'll remember to bring it up to you, and I'll see if you caught it as well as I did. But
Okay.
we open up in the middle of basically, well, actually no. First, the curtain rises, the safety curtain rises, and gives us the setting of London. It's Hitchcock basically going, "It's a theater piece." Look at how much this. Just so you know, this movie's about the theater. Now I'm being Patrick Stewart again. This impression keeps melding way too far. But no, it's actually, I think it's one of the coolest intros to a Hitchcock movie. That it's funny. This visual angle is then later redone perfectly for Rear Window. With the idea of the shades on a window being opened as the credits roll. And so this is sort of similar imagery that we get here. But we open up in London, and we open up with a car driving recklessly down the road. Now, a little production fact, the car is supposed to be driven by Eve Gill, carrying Jonathan Cooper, played by Richard Todd, the car scenes where Jane Wyman's supposed to be driving the car, Hitchcock did not want to hurt or basically put Jane Wyman in danger. So Hitchcock said, "Hey, Pat, come on over here." He goes to his daughter and says, "Do you want to do the danger driving?" And Pat Hitchcock said, "Fuck yeah," and did basically Jane Wyman's stunt work for that scene. That is such a cool little fact that I did not know until reading into this film. That's so cool. Pat Hitchcock doesn't get talked a lot about on this show, but she essentially is like the third cog in the Hitchcock wheel at a certain point for the production of these films, because she's kind of all over the place, and she also manages to be the last direct historian to a certain extent for the Hitchcock legacy. So she's kind of like a multitude of badassery roaming around inside just Pat Hitchcock. It's pretty fucking phenomenal. And also, when you watch the film, you'll notice that driving is reckless. And she is clearly not driving carefully. But they're driving in the car, and Jonathan Cooper basically says, he explains why he's been having to be picked up by Eve is because Charlotte Inwood is in trouble. And we get to our flashback for the movie. And Charlotte Inwood, played by Marlene Dietrich, by the way. And we get our first instance of the blood on the dress, which is a big factor throughout the movie. And essentially, Charlotte comes to Jonathan and says, "Oh, darling, I killed my husband. I didn't mean to, but I did it, and now I'm in trouble, and you need to help me." And so Johnny essentially proceeds to cover up by basically going back to her house to stage it as a burglary, only to be noticed by the maid as he's escaping the scene. And so that's where we start at the beginning of this film. Basically, Marlene Dietrich putting Jonathan Cooper up to the task of covering up her crime. And then, so essentially, this whole flashback scene basically accounts for the love story between Charlotte and Jonathan. And it's even clear from the first moments of their interactions that Charlotte is playing Jonathan for a fool. It's weird to say, but Marlene Dietrich's performance is very readable. And but it doesn't detract from her performance, I don't think.
Right, and this is actually one of those examples that was also used about just kind of where because they didn't really do much work, too much together, but where it got a little weird. And this is where I just found, this is one of the examples I found to be a little divisive amongst film critics, is that that in itself, the actual nature of how she's acting it out, adds more to it with what the actual film is going for. But because we, I guess more so at the time and now also now, that Hitchcock had as like number of people that he liked to go to for putting in his movies, brought that kind of bias to it with like, well, she's just not integrating well within a Hitchcock narrative, and so I would argue at that point, if that is the criticism that someone would make towards it, that it's more so that Hitchcock took on doing this movie which we can, coming back to the horror aesthetic of it too, which could be argued as technically his first horror film, like his first actual dive into really, seeing what he could do with horror, working with elements that he even did some like cinema devices in this film that were like pissed people off back in the day, and he regretted doing it.
Yep. Shh, we can't talk about it yet.
No, I won't. I promise I won't spoil that. But with that in mind, though, he worked with things that were new to him, and Hitchcock has his ego. If he's gonna admit it, he will. If he doesn't want to admit it, he'll argue with it till he's dead in the ground. Good news is, guess what? So with that in mind. It's just this is just one of those scenes that I just wanted to point out as well. That was just really kind of a very, what were they going for, and how was it actually received, and is it actually still pointing as being a staple to the film itself now?
No, yeah, and what's great about what I will say, what is undeniably great about her performance, especially when we find out what we find out, that it's weird, like the beginning of this movie thrusts you not just into a flashback, but also into basically the summation of one of these like pot boiler stories. And so the remainder of the movie is trying to solve the pot boiler for a long period of time. But like we get this like really weird, interesting setup that speeds along rather quickly, because so he goes back to her house, tries to, get her a new dress, because she has to still go on stage, by the way. We should point out, Charlotte Inwood must perform, regardless of any murder that has occurred.
The show must go on. I don't care if you're losing a limb or not.
Not until the incredibly horrifying crimes of Velma Kelly in Chicago do we get the diva that is Charlotte Inwood. I just killed my husband, but I must perform. Like it's a really interesting conversation that's had about like she's playing the angle of like, well, no, I shouldn't go on, and then Jonathan's, because he's so in love with her, is like, no, you must go on. I'm like, Jonathan is just like flat out like under a spell here, and it is redonkulous. Yeah. It's more so than any other kind of movie you see of this nature, where like a man is desperately in love with a woman who is like by the definitions of its era, like supposed to be this impossible woman. And it's like, it's so like, it works with Hitchcock, I think, because it is a little over the top and it's not winking, but it is kind of nudging you a little bit, going like, you see, because he's just too damn in love with her, and that's the problem. Like,
well, and you could also, I don't know if I would make the argument, but you could also see kind of like the influence of horror within that, as well as, again, in horror films, I can't even tell you how many movies, go into the love becoming an obsession, element to, them acting it out in some sort of way. I mean, he even kind of continues that, if you really want to like kind of dive into it. Like if you look at Psycho, in a sense, he continues that same obsession, motivation for a character with Norman Bates and his mom, and so a much more darker example, but you still see the same theme, just, creepier.
Oh yeah, no, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I'm gonna bookmark that too, because that the comparison to Psycho is very, very. You're not the only one who brought this up, but I'm glad you brought it up, because it is a very astute point.
Well, I mean, how can we not look at Psycho and be like, dude, he had a crush on his mom? Like, like, how could you? I mean, you can't watch that movie, and you can't watch Bates Motel and not think that.
Well, yeah, and that's been the permeating thought. That's the permeating theme throughout Psycho, is this Oedipus complex that falls within that. Stefano's talked about it openly on every behind the scenes you can imagine of like it, because it's like I don't know if you've ever seen Mick Garris's Psycho for the Beginning, but that's what the movie is. The movie is basically Norman, had an unhealthy relationship with his mother, and by unhealthy I mean unhealthy, and that even permeates Psycho without having a Psycho for the Beginning, or even a Bates Motel. Although, if you guys haven't watched Bates Motel the show, watch Bates Motel the show. It's really good. You'd be surprised how wrong you'd be in assuming it's terrible, because you'd be wrong. It's amazing.
The worst thing about that show is that it was marketed as a very cliched TV drama. If you give it a chance, it actually does dive in really well. I just also love the actors in that show because they are just fantastic.
And it pulls absolutely no punches. Like, that show refuses to back down on anything it's doing, and if anything, it doubles down.
And again, it's Vera Farmiga, who we already said on our show, in my opinion, is a modern day scream queen in the making. Along with a few other notable names too, but even Freddie Highmore, his acting in that film was such in that show was such a opposite direction of what the movies he was in prior, and they nailed it perfectly, man. So it's definitely, like, if you like Psycho in any sort of facet, or you like Hitchcock's filmography, just check out Bates Motel. It's worth your time.
Yes, and this is Hitchcock again. I do approve of Bates Motel. It's wonderful viewing up here when I'm just kicking back and relaxing, and I do appreciate that they homage me in their own way. Like, I'm glad they didn't try to copy me, because don't try to fucking copy me. Like, not for your AMC TV or your A&E TV show, whatever it is. But I'm glad that you did what you did, and I'm happy for you. Bravo, Bates Motel.
The last time that Hitchcock was copied was Psycho again with Vince Vaughn, and that went great.
Let me tell you something, because I liked that Good Will Hunting movie. We saw it up here. It's magnificent. But if Gus Van Sant ever touches another one of my movies again, I'm going to beat the shit out of him when he gets up here. People make fun of me for my weight, but I am about as effective as a wrestler as Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. So I can just body slam that fool like it's no fucking business.
I'm totally just gonna load up my copy of WWE 2K18 at this point just to make a Alfred Hitchcock wrestler. So.
Do it. Take a photo and send it to us.
Yeah, and he's totally gonna enter like a no DQ tables, ladders, and chairs match with like fucking Sting and Stone Cold and Undertaker and The Rock, and I'm like, oh my god, a surprise wrestler! It's Hitchcock! It's Hitchcock!
It just comes out with a rock version of his theme song. Yeah,
could you imagine just seeing him running out in his suit and just picks up and suplexes freaking Undertaker. I'm down for that.
He's got a little bird. He's got a little plush bird that he has perched on his shoulder when he does it.
If they programmed the game the way that I would love it to be programmed, I would love to give him the attack of just chucking birds at people. So, this worked for Tippy. It's going to work for freaking Stone Cold.
This is amazing. But anyway, the plot of this movie.
Okay, sorry.
No, it's fine, because I wanted to know that in my head now, and now I've got it in my head. Hitchcock as a WWE wrestler, I think he would have smacked the hell out of Vince McMahon for the way he acts. But anyway,
I started this.
So yeah. Oh god,
I'm the king of acting like this. How dare you?
No, sorry, Vince. The XFL is a stupid fucking idea, and you're a stupid person for trying to do it.
Is anyone even watching, Vince?
No.
Exactly.
No one was fucking watching. No one was ever gonna fucking watch. They like their other football right over here. You do wrestling. Do that. So anyway, the whole flashback essentially reveals that within this, that Johnny or Jonathan, it's clear that he has been witnessed by the maid, and he goes through in his head the likelihood of that happening, none the least of which is the maid telling the cops what's going on in this montage of this dream sequence, but also the phone book being pulled out going through his name. I thought this was like a great touch. And it's something like, for the kids who are listening to this 50 years down the line, you used to have to look up a phone book to find a phone number because sometimes you didn't have a cell phone. In fact, in 1950, you didn't have that at all. You had a rotary phone. You had to look up the numbers and you had to dial them like a human being. So he thinks he's going to leave, and he starts to grab a suitcase, but then he looks out the window and sees there's 2 cops waiting for him. And so he just puts his suitcase away, which I thought was actually a really cool touch of just like, no, if I'm going to play it smart, I better not have my suitcase out, because then they'll be like, what, you going on a trip, governor? Like, you about ready to leave? And so he goes out. He's trying to leave without them noticing him, and they come up to the door and they say, we want to speak with you. And then he basically says, why, certainly. And then he just bolts, gets in his car, and drives off after the cops have smashed the safety glass. And he drives to the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, or RADA, as it's called by the woman who gives him information over the phone as to how to find Eve Gill. And he interrupts Eve Gill in the middle of a performance, rather rudely, I'd say. For an actor to interrupt another actor in the middle of their scene is makes you quite a garbage person.
Yeah.
And
I was just going to say, I think this is all, I wasn't able to go, this is where my research kind of stopped a little bit, and I just went back to watch more of the movie. But, like, I think this is also kind of like one of those moments where it's just like, is it good, really? Is it a good film because this is in it, or is it good because, like, the raw human nature of that was captured, you know?
Yeah.
And so it's definitely another divisive piece of what regards this film being, you know, a classic or not.
Right. Well, and I will say within the legacy of this film, like, as we're going along, you'll see how there are uneven parts that would make you understand why it's not as memorable as other Hitchcock films. However, there is so much that works here that I think that it would be a crime to ignore it. And the one thing we can bring up about Johnny right now is that for how much Marlene Dietrich's Charlotte is twisting him around, I'm going to argue that Johnny's probably worse at this game too, because he's basically doing the same thing that Charlotte's doing to him, but it looks terrible because he is essentially like using and abusing Eve throughout the entirety of his scenes with her. Like it's rather unsettling, even from frame one, how he's using her and taking advantage of her. And I got this like modern day vibe of like, ew, like, but yeah, I mean, and we've talked about, like, you know, that treatment in films before, but like he's just a seedy asshole. But regardless, she loves him. That's the thing. She loves him, and that's unfortunately why she decides to help him hide by taking him to her father's boat. And we're gonna enter in the one and only Commodore Gill, played by Alistair Sim. Now, Matt, I'm gonna ask you: are you familiar with Alistair Sim beyond this movie?
So I actually did look up a little more of Alistair Sim because I was like, this dude is really recognizable to me, and I can never figure out the reason why. Like I was like, and I didn't know if it was just that like he looked similar to actors that I already knew, you know, or that I kind of like just really adored. And it took me a while to figure out why this dude really stood out to me. And then like the more I was doing my research, I was like, bah humpking fumbug, no fucking way. Like
That's right.
I was like, wait a minute.
That's right.
So like I didn't realize like it was like it was a surreal thing because it's like I never knew the guy. But I knew him from a movie that is so big and so recognized and remade so much that I just couldn't see him in a film that was anything else but about fucking Christmas.
Matt, you don't get it. Like I'm Alistair fucking Sim. Like, how did you not know that I was Ebenezer Scrooge?
Well, and that's just what I mean. Like, it was just one of those. and I kind of like talking about like Freddie Highmore doing something that was kind of a little more out of his realm. Like, I mean, not like I watch all of Alistair Slim's movies, but just like, again, like A Christmas Carol, like if we could just kind of like for a minute forget that there's like 50 Christmas Carol movies and just pretend this is the only one, like, and this is the only one that everyone's ever have always known, then it's just like, it's just try to imagine in you know, this horror-esque type of film is just it was just something that like I couldn't piece together at first, and I was just like, holy shit, I think this like shut down my ADHD for a hot minute. They overloaded it.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, and because now when we're talking about this particular Christmas Carol, we are talking about the Christmas Carol from 1951 that was titled Scrooge in Britain and released as A Christmas Carol over here. I have the Blu-ray myself, and it is a staple in the household for people up to about our age. I'd want to say like maybe like 95's the capper, because I also grew up with Muppet Christmas Carol, so I had various different Christmas Carol influences in my life. But Alistair Sim is the one that, like, if you know Alistair Sim from anything, you know him for playing Ebenezer Scrooge in that Christmas Carol movie. But he was also an adept comic actor. He was a Scottish actor who became a popular performer for the West End Theatre in films like The Bell of St. Trinian's and An Inspector Calls and The Happiest Days of Your Life. And the role he's playing here, it is goofy dad. Is I think the proper terminology is that he's goofy dad. Like, there's not any other way to put it. So, like, basically, Eve and Johnny are sneaking around the house, and then Commodore Gill opens the door and says, "Why don't you just come on inside?" He's just like,
yeah, he did have a very nourishing, like, atmosphere to him. Like, coming back to the scene where I was talking about with the blood stain, like, prior to him noticing that, like, he's even talking to Eve, just like, why aren't you on there? Why don't you just go up there? You're great. You know, something that, like, encouraging words that, like, a dad or somebody who's compassionate or nourishing would say, like, go on, get up there, do it now.
Yeah. And also this film being set in Britain also has a bit of a British thing. Now, it should be pointed out that Hitchcock doesn't particularly love how Alistair Sim portrayed it. He talks about it in the Hitchcock Truffaut book. I'm going to disagree with Hitchcock, because anytime you put Alistair Sim in something, it's at the very least worth watching. Now, does it work in this movie? It's debatable. I think that he falls in line with other Hitchcock side characters that pull this same thing off. The difference being is that Commodore Gill is a very active character in this movie, more so than you'd think he would be. And we'll find out as we go along, but, you know, they bring Johnny into the house. He's sleeping. He's fainted. He's exhausted from being such a dick. And
it's an exhausting job. It takes. It used to be a union.
You know, manipulating a friend's emotions, and, you know, like, trying to cover up for the crimes of a person who's abusing you. Like, you know, being a dick's a hard job, man. Like, I totally agree. But
it's an exhausting job. It takes a lot out of you. There needs to be a union.
Jonathan Cooper is our president. Okay.
I'm playing.
Oh God, help us, please. Anyway, we're so basically Commodore Gill asks the question I ask when I first see this movie back in college, and still ask to this day. Why are you helping this asshole? And her response is of a schoolgirl crush, of the nature of just like, he makes me feel so, you know, it makes me feel so full and whatnot. We also get a lot of information about her, why she's an actress, why she does what she does. It's explained that her father and her mother don't live together. Her father's kind of a roustabout. Commodore Gill is the kind of guy who thinks he's a daring rascally criminal because he smuggled 2 cases of brandy illegally, when in fact he's a goofy dad. And but regardless, he basically is trying to figure out with her, well, why is he even here? Why would he basically cover up for her? And how do we know that Charlotte isn't framing him? Which is a valid question at this point. And as they're doing that, he is woken up, and they have the idea of saying, like, well, let's just take the bloody dress to the police and have Johnny explain what's going on. And we get our first rather telling clue about Johnny's personality at the very least, which is he refuses the plan and tosses that dress into the fire. So just destroying the only evidence that could clear Johnny. And then he feigns it off as, I'm sorry, I'm so excited, I don't know what I'm doing. And then he gets brought up to bed, and Commodore Gill says, like, hey, if you get bored and want to read anything, there's some good murder mystery novels up there. And then they basically Eve devises a plan with her father of basically, like, I'm going to go down there and basically confront Charlotte and find out the answers. And he keeps saying, no, she's a dangerous woman. Don't do it. She's too dangerous a woman. No. But, you know, they sleep it off to think it over. She wakes up the next morning. Commodore Gill, up to this point, has been playing an accordion and acting like a goofy dad, as I said before. He fell asleep with the accordion in his hands in a rather comical fashion. Now, this is one of those things that I think is a little too slapsticky for Hitchcock, of having somebody with an instrument that they fell asleep with, and then, like, that being a point of, like, taking the instrument out of his hand. But I don't mind it. It's not distracting from anything. It's part of his character. So she leaves, and she gets a note from her father saying she's a dangerous woman, be careful. So basically alluding to, like, he doesn't want her to do this, but he knows she's gonna do it because of who she is as a person. So she goes back to Charlotte's house, and it's swarmed by police, and she can't get in. So she goes across the street to a bar and essentially scouts it out, presumably trying to find the maid who witnessed Johnny leaving the house. And in that time, she has drinks with, well, I should say before she has drinks with our character that we're going to meet here, she gets annoyed the shit out of by a rather jowly man with glasses who doesn't know what social cues are, and essentially shoves him off. But then enter the dashing Michael Wilding, who plays none other than Detective Inspector Wilfred O. Smith. But we like to just call him Smith because he's ashamed of the name Wilfred. He does not like his first name, Matt. It is, I don't know why. Wilfred's a charming name.
Wilfred?
I mean,
it definitely beats out Chubby for me.
Oh, yeah, no. Wilfred Smith is a man you'll marry your daughter to.
You know, the worst that if my daughter was going to marry somebody by the name of Wilfred Smith, the only thing I'd be worried about him doing is just nagging her on the exact length of growth of grass that you need for a substantial looking yard. So Wilfred Smith doesn't sound very threatening.
No. He's not going to be put in any Die Hard scenarios down the line with marriage. So, I'm Detective Wilfred. I'm supposed to be here. Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker. But they meet at the bar.
Where there's a Will, there's a Fred. If he was going to be a vigilante, that would be his tagline.
Where there's a Will, there's a Fred. Who are you? I'm Wilfred.
I don't know if you're here to end me or save me.
You just couldn't let me go, could you, Wilfred? I think you and I are destined to do this forever. Recast, please, Warner Brothers. We're bored in quarantine. Redo the Christopher Nolan Batman movies, but change his name from Bruce to Wilfred. Just do it. I don't care anymore. But so, at any rate, they have a discussion, and they kind of have a little bit of a meet cute, essentially. Like that not too uncommon for a Hitchcock movie. You know, sometimes the detective falls in love with the girl. This is also normal detective movies. But she meets him. They agree to have afternoon tea, and then as they're having their conversation, the maid walks in and basically tells her patrons at the bar that she's not going to tell anybody about her experience because she's waiting to get on the stand and be the star witness of the trial. So, you know, if you need alluded shades to this, you know, look towards any, you know, high-profile criminal case within the latter half of the 20th century where, you know, a star witness could have their own freaking book written about them or a profile about them in the New York Times. So essentially, she goes back to the bar and cuts a deal with this maid, which is, you tell Charlotte that I'm your cousin who's coming to relieve you because you're sick, and I will basically dig up stories about the murder for my paper. But in fact, she's just going to play that acting role to the hilt that she's been training for at the RADA to uncover the plot of Charlotte Inwood and basically save Johnny's life. So that's what we're dealing with here, is the going undercover as a different person. The difference is that she does not have to do the things that Martin Lawrence had to do in Big Mama's house. And as we'll find out in this movie, her disguise is not even close to anything. And there's a reason for this in production history. Now, I don't know if you had read about this, Matt. As we discussed, Jane Wyman is the star of this film, and also Marlene Dietrich. Now, Dietrich is a bigger star, but she's obviously playing a smaller role in this film. I think it could be, absolutely, solidified. There's stories bandied about that, like, well, Marlene Dietrich said, like, I did a movie with Hitchcock, Jane Wyman was in it, and she only agreed to do it if she would have her name above me in the title, and she got her way. But apparently Dietrich was a bit mothering to Wyman, according to Wyman's account, and was a little bit more or less judgmental the way a mother is. And see, mother issues. There's references all over the place, guys. But the bigger thing with this is that Dietrich, as there are better sources for knowledge of Marlene Dietrich. But I will point out that she did not just act on the screen or sing. She was a consummate artist who ran the gamut throughout all the different facets of this industry and its art. She learned about lighting. She learned about art direction. She learned about makeup. She learned about the camera. She learned about lighting. She knew how to be lit. And there is so much so to the point where there's a story where the cinematographer of Stage Fright, one Wilkie Cooper, was basically told by Dietrich how she should be lit. And Wilkie Cooper went to go argue about this to Hitchcock and go like, do you know what, Dietrich's asking me to do? And Hitchcock essentially gave the answer of like, so fucking do it then, Wilkie. Jesus fucking Christ. Like, because Hitchcock understood that Dietrich was an artist in her own right and actually gave her a lot of freedom to do the things that she wanted to do. So consequently, Hitchcock is known for being a lot more restrictive with his actors when it comes to, and we're not even talking about the things that we've discussed in the past with the Birds. We're talking about basically like they're not allowed to basically ad-lib or stray away from things that are constructed within the frame. Like you can do the choices you want in the frame, but you can't deviate from everything that's been set up in the pre-production, right? Other directors do this too. Like Fincher's notorious for this. Like you've got to do it his way and you've got to do it 90 times. But in the case of Jane Wyman's appearances in the film and her disguises as the maid, it seems that Wyman was a little self-conscious because she was playing the mousier character, whereas Dietrich was playing this glamorous, actress character. And so when they would see the rushes, Wyman apparently got self-conscious about it and kept changing the appearance. It's why her disguise as the maid is inconsistent in this movie, is because it kind of kept changing. And it also kind of explains the scene where she's basically trying on the disguise of putting on glasses and whatnot, and then having it basically blow back in her face when her mother recognizes her anyway. So it's an interesting little tidbit into this film and how the disguise itself works, because at this point the film will rely on not her looking different, but sounding different, and also relying on the fact that not everybody knows exactly who she is. So she goes in to meet Marlene Dietrich, and Marlene Dietrich's character Charlotte Inwood is basically being dressmaid for the funeral of her late husband. It extends to the fact that she does not like to be depressed about this. She explicitly states the moment she meets Eve, basically disguised as one Doris Tinsdale. That's another great name for your child, Doris Tinsdale. But she basically, like, she says she's debating with her manager partner Freddie Williams about going to a theater garden party after the funeral. They were basically going to happen like one after the other. And so she's basically playing around in the realm of just like, I don't want to go to the funeral anyway because I'll be depressed. And the theater garden won't depress me. But she's worried about how will it look if she goes to that party after the funeral. And they're bickering over it. And as she meets Charlotte for the first time, Charlotte tells Doris, a.k.a. Eve, like basically just lets out her personality and what she'll be as a boss, which is essentially the Devil Wears Prada. Like that notion of the boss from hell kind of thing. And as they're kind of having their banter back and forth, Charlotte is informed that the police want to talk to her again, and she is informed also of the names of the detectives, one of them being Inspector Detective Smith. Wilfred's coming in, but Eve doesn't want Wilfred to know what she's doing. So Charlotte solves the problem because Charlotte just wants to get rid of these cops anyway. She basically tells Doris, like, you go into the other room, and when I cough, you come in from the other room and tell them that I've got the doctor coming. So the police are brought in, they interview her, and she lies on her divan, head back, in the most dramatic fashion imaginable. Like, the lighting on this is incredible on Dietrich. It's so over the top. It's so wonderful to watch. To watch her basically being like, I don't know anything about this, Johnny. I don't know nothing about this murder. And it's just, there's a wink in the eye that I detect from this film coming from that moment of her just lying on the divan, the way it's so overly lit. And then she basically gets the call, and then she leaves, and then Eve leaves to go meet Detective Smith for that afternoon tea. And we get the introduction of Eve's mom, played by none other than Sybil Thorndike. Sybil Thorndike, another great name, by the way. She was an actress who was an accomplished British actress who wrote, who amongst other things was in things like St. Joan, which Bernard Shaw wrote especially for her, and received many, many honors. And she basically follows in line with the tradition of Hitchcock moms that are either aloof, overbearing, or a combination of those plus dead in a fruit cellar. and we're talking about like she just basically is in denial of anything going on, so much so that when they have that conversation, you know, like at that with the detective and then Commodore Gill coming back into it, she's just not believing that her daughter would meet somebody at random or whatever. Like the whole the conversation that I, you know, thought was most telling was like the whole like, you know, like when did you meet my daughter? Well, I've only known her a day and a half. Oh, well, that's not a very long time. And when did you meet? And you're like, well, we met at a pub across the street. It's like, oh, that's interesting. So again, we're dealing with overtly patrician values. Obviously, this is not how we, you know, generally think today. Although meeting somebody at a bar one day and then inviting them to your parents' house for tea the next day is a bit abrupt. Like I can't imagine that's how most relationships form over the course of the modern era and whatnot. But I guess also to keep in mind, we're in the middle of a pandemic and chaos is reigning, so I guess the rules are out the book at this point. But anyway, as the story progresses, they basically get back to the theater, and we see Marlene Dietrich do this wonderful musical number, The Laziest Gal in Town. I wish I had the ability legally to play the entire song for you guys in this episode. I will put in a little clip of it, but Matt, are you familiar with Blazing Saddles?
Of course I am. I still kind of wonder if it would actually still be considered a very funny movie based on some of the things that some of the humor in there.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and it's a debate. I think Blazing Saddles is a debate that will carry on for a bit in the coming years. But I love Mel Brooks, so I'm inclined to be a bit more of a defender of that film, and I still find it to be a very funny film. But if you remember Madeline Kahn's Academy Award nominated performance as Lily Von Stoop in that movie, it's basically this musical number. This very, very Marlene Dietrich-esque music number where she's basically describing her approach to acting in the song. Yeah. And I for one of my favorite behind the scenes stories, or at least anecdotes, is from Peter Bogdanovich, Ascot and all, talking about how he saw Marlene Dietrich perform this song in Denver, at a concert in Denver. And she sang this song, and she introduced it by going, "This is a song I sung for Mr. Hitchcock." And then she went into the song, and he says, and she was lazy about it, but it was a beautiful lazy. And it's just wonderful to like see this musical number, this song written by Cole Porter, the great Cole Porter, and to be done in this way that really, along with the final scene of hers, really does sum up her character and how she's aware that she's the most beautiful woman in the room and everybody wants her, which, you know, if we're going to talk about Marlene Dietrich as a performer, obviously this is something she's used to doing. But you can't imagine what was going on in my head. Now, when you were on the show last, we talked about Rob Zombie, and specifically talking about like him deviating from his normal fare. But I was immediately also brought back from a horror prosthetic to Baby's musical number in fucking House of a Thousand Corpses, where she's intentionally, you know, just vamping it up. And it was like actually made me appreciate what she does in that scene a little bit more, because I'm like, oh, they're drawing off of Dietrich. It's not just that one performance in Blazing Saddles.
You know, man, careful there. Careful how much praise you give to Sherry Moon. Depending where you say that in the horror community, you might give everyone a triggering effect because there's a definite huge distaste for Sherry Moon, just as much as there is a love for her.
Oh yeah, well, I'll point out my defending point on Sherry Moon Zombie for posterity is that for what she is given to do, I think she does it admirably. That's where I draw my line on it. There are roles she's done that I'm not a fan of, but there are roles that she's done that I like. I think she's good as Baby in House of a Thousand and Devil's Rejects. I still have not seen Three from Hell. In the Halloween movies,
it's okay. I mean, it doesn't really wrap up the story.
No.
So I mean, we can talk about the movie if you want, but
no. Well, no, we'll save that. We'll save that for the zombie retrospective that'll come in 50 years, and we'll just be old men talking about like, remember Rob Zombie? And they'll be like, other grandpa, nobody gives a shit about Rob Zombie anymore. This is in the future. We're still podcasting over Skype because the quarantine has just stayed in effect that long.
Right, yeah, with how things are going, hey, you never know.
Oh, no. Oh, absolutely. I'm prepared to be a bubble boy. But anyway, like but in regards to like certain performances, like her role in the Halloween movies, I wasn't a huge fan of. Like, I think she's not my favorite part of those movies, obviously, but like, it's hard for me to, ultimately bash an actor or an actress for attempting to do the job they're given. And I think Sherry Moon, for somebody who's not traditionally an actor outside of working with her husband, I think she does just fine. I think if I was going to break it down analytically, I'd probably have to be a little bit harsher, but like I have a hard time giving it too much flack, because I'm just like, man, like, could I do any better? Because I certainly could not fit into the dresses that Sherry Moon Zombie can fit into. And I most certainly cannot wear blonde curls the way she could. So obviously, there are things that Sherry Moon Zombie can do that I can't do. Which I don't think is an unfair assessment. But regardless, like, so we go back, she finishes this musical number, she goes back into the dressing room, and Johnny's there. And Johnny is a little obsessed. Now we get a little bit of that taste of what you were talking about with the obsessions in horror films, or like the obsessions with a person in love in horror films, which I'd argue a scene like this is something you definitely find, not just of the era or even before it, but you also find it way down the line in other obsessive love stories that trend into the horror, dip their toes into the horror realm. And in this particular scene, she basically brushes him off and said, like, look, thank you for taking the rap for me, but I'm going to continue being a star, and you can just go ahead and hide now. And he plays a card that he has no right to play yet, which is, well, I still have that dress with the blood stain on it. And he basically says, so long as I have that bloodstained dress, I control the show from now on. So thus putting Charlotte into her own little trap with the dress. And this basically sets off her psychological reactions going forward, I would argue. Because at this point, Charlotte is now in her own little trap, even though she set herself up for it. So it's kind of weird. Like, it's a trap you weren't expecting, I guess, is what you would point it out as. And then Johnny gets away after Eve eavesdrops on that conversation and then is asked to go back into the dressing room with the policeman. Johnny escapes. And by the way, Eve pretending to faint is the best pretend fainting you'll ever see in a movie, because it's so obviously a fake faint. Like, she does, the sound cue is, oh no. And then falling to the ground. And then she's basically now, the whole goal here is to get the detectives to realize that Charlotte should be a suspect. And the way they're going to execute this is essentially through exposing her at the garden party, or cornering her at the garden party, by bringing Detective Smith into the whole proceedings, and basically getting him to realize that Charlotte is probably guilty. So they drive over to the theater garden party where Eve's going to not only have to play the role of handing out programs for her Royal Dramatic Academy at this party, but also playing assistant to Charlotte. And she's in the car with David, or she's in the car with Wilfred O. Smith. And I'm trying to think, Matt, has there ever been a scene in a movie today? I'm not talking about back then or back in the 50s, because obviously you could kind of pull this off. But I'm trying to think of, in a modern movie, would you ever have an intimate embrace and kissing scene following the discussion of, hey, my boss might be a murderer?
Oh, God, yeah. I mean, it's a common trope used in horror films, especially in, like, whodunit, especially the intense whodunit ones that even, like, you know, meld in, like, the psychological horror themes into it as well. So, like, I wish I had, like, a great example on top of my head, but, like, you see this all the time where a character who is holding the secret together or, you know, keeping something, you know, out of the narrative that, you know, the rest of the characters in the film aren't aware of, you know, when they get put into a vulnerable point, like being, you know, kissed and embraced in this case, then at that point, what the filmmakers is making that character relatable, showing that we're willing to let all of our secrets come out to the right person who can make us feel vulnerable. You know,
right? And
you know,
and that's a good. And I was going to say that's a good point, because she's basically unloading her hesitations, even though Wilfred is basically so love blind that he looks like he's just been smacked around with goofy juice. Like, the look on his face is one of, you're mighty purty, ma'am. Like, it's yeah, you're oh, Miss Wyman, you were great in Johnny Belinda. I loved you in that. I know I'm supposed to be British, but for the purposes of this conversation, I'm from Texas. Like, it's an interesting kissing scene that happens in that moment. One that I thought was both very cute and adorable for the era, and also just like as a austerity point. Because you are right, those mystery films will have that vulnerability point where you do have, like, the hero and the heroine, you know, like, embracing each other, you know, falling in love bit by bit as they're trying to solve who beheaded the person at the party. But it just felt very interesting to see how that unfolds, and how basically she basically is falling in love with him while also trying to use him at the same time. So in a sense, she's also using people the way Johnny's used people and the way Charlotte's used Johnny. So it's interesting how the cycle of this keeps going and spinning on and around and around. When they get to the party, and Eve's confronted by the maid who says, you know, like, I need more money. You need to pay me more money for this job of staying low so that you can be in my boss's employ, or I'm going to start squealing. So she calls her father, Commodore Gill, to get a hold of whatever money he can and meet her at the garden party. And she goes to make up Charlotte Inwood, and Charlotte Inwood basically throws down the best insult in this movie while still trying to be supportive. The line of, because Eve is decked out in a nice new gown, she looks very nice. She's dolled herself up, I guess is the terminology. I mean, she's pretty regardless of, you know, any dolling up she does. But the bottom line is she does not look like the mousy character that she was prior. And Charlotte says, "Is that a new dress?" And she, or what happened to that? What happened to that hideous figure of yours? He's like, "I got a new dress." He's just like, "Well, don't ever take it away. It does wonders for you, darling." And she says, "I got it on discount." And she said, "I didn't ask you for personal details." Like, there's this catty bitchiness coming out of Marlene Dietrich's mouth is just so wonderful.
You just gotta love it because it's just like it's so quick and yet spiteful, and yet we've all been there. And like so fast that we've all just wanted to do that. Be like, I don't need the detail.
If there was a way to put all the stepsisters and the stepmother from Cinderella into one character, it's Marlene Dietrich in those few lines. It's amazing how it manages to convey not just her character, but also when you read about how Wyman and Dietrich interacted on set, it adds another layer of, ooh, this is juicy. But so Commodore Gill gets to the party and he hands off the money to the blackmailing maid, and they meet up, and they're basically, Eve has not basically convinced Smith yet that anything should be suspected of Charlotte. Like she hasn't had a chance because she's had to play this duality role throughout the course of the party, and it sends to the big theme of the film, which is that she's an actor playing the role of a lifetime while having to play another role for another person. She's basically acting multiple lives in it, and it lends to the whole thread of, being an actor and the many roles you inhabit throughout that life. Consequently, Charlotte herself is playing a role throughout this entire movie, not just in terms of her defending her innocence and her ignorance of the murder, but also her as a person. So there's a lot of duality kind of brimming throughout the film. So Commodore Gill basically devises a plan to scare the living shit out of Marlene Dietrich. And he does it with that red dress again. But how does he do it, Matt?
Well, so, and you're asking about like the image, like the image of the stain, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So like I kind of like already talked about, like to me, how do I explain it? So, because like I never really looked into actually how they pulled off the effect, and I'm kind of upset with myself that I didn't do it because that's something I love to do. But it was it was like it's a quick second thing that you're just gonna think like it was like this weird blotch that they just left on a dress and then just like poorly edited out, right?
Right.
Right. But what was smart about it, and what I thought was cool about it, is that this was doing something that modern horror films and even classics like I want to say Poltergeist or even freaking Exorcist to an extent did, and that was they showed the thing that is haunting this individual.
Yes.
Whether that is a trauma, whether that is an act of violence they committed and not mean to, or saw an act of violence. It's showing that the person's psyche isn't all there, that there is something holding it down, that there is a trauma that's there. And it's such a poignant, small little scene that's so very easy to just be like, oh, wow, that was cool. Or what was that chocolate stain all about?
Yeah.
But if you take that second to really think about it, and just like, oh, okay, they're talking about an actual somebody who's having a trigger right now.
Yeah.
Somebody who's actually going through like a really hard moment of, something a baggage that he cannot leave behind.
Yeah.
And so it's just like the effect of it was so, again, and to me, and what I love about my ADHD brain is that I can just analyze these things really well, and to a number extent, fairly enough. But is that it was just such a smart thing to include within this film that makes it more of a dark film, that makes it more of a horror film in that regard, And so it's what makes me love it, because I always thought those type of scenes weren't really started to expand on until like the 70s or 80s, and then seeing it like in this film.
Yeah, and the scene in question with she gets revealed a doll with a blood stain all over it, and it sends her into a shock. Now, when we talk about Charlotte's trauma with this, her trauma stems from the fact of what we saw in the scenes previous with Johnny basically saying, as long as I've got that red dress or that the bloodstained dress, I'm in control of the show. And so that's what's triggering her, right? Now how we get that doll is, I'd argue, Matt, it's one of my favorite scenes in the movie that has nothing to do with anything Hitchcockian. Because Commodore Sims wins this doll by shooting basically going to a shooting gallery, like the equivalent of an amusement park. We get this scene where the most British lady in the world is basically telling Commodore Gill how to shoot one of these fake guns at the amusement park. And I want to bring it up before we brisk along to this plot, because we're going to get to the meat of this film. But Joyce Grenfell is a noted character actor in Britain who played that overly British lady primarily because she had that overexpressive British smile, or that look of like the teeth, like she's sticking them out very quiet. And she plays that role to a hilt. But he wins the doll. He cuts his finger in a scene that I felt was a little bit unnerving for the period, and smears the blood on the doll, gives it to a kid. Kid brings it up to Marlene Dietrich, and Marlene Dietrich sees the doll, and she freaks out, sending her into a tailspin. And so now she's basically... she's having her little trauma moment, and consequently this situation also outs Eve's character as being a double actor in everybody's world, because now she's now Smith knows that she's Doris, the maid. So we go to a scene where basically Jane Wyman confesses to Smith, all while this time Johnny has returned to Eve and is basically staying in Eve's parents' house, still continuing to hide from the authorities. And she breaks down, confesses, and then she and her father come up with a plan to trap Charlotte in her game. They basically want to get a confession. And we set the stage, if you will, for the confession of a lifetime with this. They set a microphone up in her dressing room in the empty theater and are basically going to get the confession that way. And we get one of the most tense scenes between Dietrich and Wyman at this point. And essentially, we are revealed within this that she doesn't know anything because she's still holding to that story, but she's also willing to give up anything and everything in the world to keep her name out of this. So they're basically going to catch her on bribery charges.
And you also got to kind of like think that her character is such a devoted thespian to her art, you know, that, and she's so devoted to her art that she is able to kind of tap into it to meta act the ultimate, you know, or not meta act, method act, excuse me, I chose the wrong word. Method act, the ultimate method acting for, well, this film, you know, for what would be the ultimate role. Right. You know, and so you got to kind of wonder if she's actually starting to believe it because she's been acting it so much, you know, lying about it so much. And then you also got to kind of wonder at the same time that if she's too far gone, that she doesn't realize she's doing that, you know?
Right. So, and we get a peek of that in a second here. But the basic bottom line is that they catch her in a trap of trying to bribe Wyman's character, who has at this point unveiled all of her acting layers to reveal that she is just Eve and this is what she knows, without toying to the fact that she knows that the police are outside. And Charlotte leaves, and basically the police apprehend her. They keep her there, and Charlotte, played by Marlene Dietrich, as we've been saying throughout this whole episode, goes into a monologue about the people that don't love her and show affection back when she loves them unconditionally. And it doesn't fully work for the story, but it works for that character. So it's very, very, very odd situation because it explains a lot about her.
Yeah, and again, like, this is where, like, I consider the game to be pretty great, or not game, sorry, a movie to be pretty great, is that coming back to, like, what I was talking about with, like, the character in the movie and how her motivations and, like, everything that she is trying to do to self-survive in this, is almost, it's really just kind of, I guess the way I want to describe it is that it's iconic in this scene. Is it the first movie to ever do something like this? No. But for the time, how they did it, and just coming back to, like, how you described it with that very tense moment between the two of them, talking about the bribery, like, this might be a little me overanalyzing it a little bit, but I feel like you could see some of the actors on their faces legitimately being shocked, you know, kind of feeling like, oh my God, like, did she actually bribe someone? Like, obviously it's within the film, but it's delivered in such a well thought out way that it even just kind of like gets your attention and brings you right back to the severity of this character's ego.
Yeah. And absolutely. And it not only does that, but it also, to my mind, it lays a foundation for what she's been experiencing the entire time. I think if I have only one problem with it is that it just feels like to end her character in that moment is a little strange. But as we're going to talk about with this finale, which it can kind of be not rushed through, but, you know, like, it's very simple. Because her final moment needs to be that, because there's a phone call that Smith makes to the police, and Commodore Gill goes like, well, you should have more than enough now to convict Charlotte of the murder. And Smith points out, no, we know that Johnny killed her husband, and he's killed before, and he claimed it as self-defense, but we know he'll do it again. And at this point, Johnny was already apprehended and bolted, and he and Jane Wyman got down to the bottom of the theater, and they're hiding in a stage carriage, and it's revealed that Johnny lied in the flashback. So yeah. I told you that I would bring up another franchise that does flashbacks and twists them around. It's called Saw, and I. Oh,
really? I was actually going to say that sounded like more like M. Night Shyamalan's wheelhouse doing twists. But Saw's also a good example.
Yeah, I think we're both right, because this is Shyamalanian to a certain extent, to be like, no, none of it happened.
Yeah, remember this thing that you thought was going to be the twist that I really heavily hinted on the whole time? Guess what? He lied.
Yeah, and Hitchcock has said to Truffaut that he felt that was a failure. He basically said that, like, look, I've got two failures in my life. The bomb going off in Sabotage, I hated that I killed that kid, and this, because audiences weren't ready for this. But arguably, this is innovating a technique that we would see down the line in other films. So, you know, like, it's weird that, like, for Hitchcock seeing it as a failure, if he were to look in 20 years past his death and see what films were doing, he actually innovates that, because he's basically using the machinations of film editing and storytelling to trick the audience in a way that, yes, we alluded to M. Night Shyamalan doing that, but also the Saw films, I think, do that a lot too, because they fudge around their flashbacks a lot, to the point where what you saw in, say, one flashback at the beginning of, like, say, Saw 4 or 5 is then upended in something like Saw 6 or 7. So,
well, and the thing is that this technique that he introduced, although very divisive, is so common in horror now that you still see it like in actual amateur written horror stories that you'd find on Reddit, for example. And another one that I think is very, very poignant to point out that I don't think people realize where this is also used in is almost any movie about a serial killer. And so if we look at Silence of the Lambs, or if we look at, certain biopics of John Wayne Gacy or Ted Bundy, it'll reveal that the villain in that time lied about a certain thing. And that was the twist,
Yeah.
and I don't mean to be so vague about it as to like confuse anyone, but it'll be like, coming back to Silence of the Lambs, Anthony Hopkins' character Hannibal, was obviously we all knew that he was planning, to eventually escape, but we didn't know how he was going to do that. And his lie about talking about, who he was and keeping things vague from Clarice was kind of that lie. Kind of the thing. Now, was it the exact same thing? No. And Saw is the better example, and M. Night Shyamalan's films are, I guess, the better example. I will argue that's films like Saw kind of did it a bit better. The only thing that's holding them back is they went into way too much over detail about certain motivations for certain characters. But we're not talking about Saw. Point being is that this is a very, very common element and device that is now used in horror and even just thrillers, dramas, and actions.
Oh yeah,
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say Memento, like as a film that's not even a horror film, Memento does that in spades. Cause that's kind of basically the way it's constructed is to work backwards. And
another film that was just like really loved, but on the more underground scene is Cody will just disagree because he hates it. So Cody's actually what I would like to use as an example of people that where this device doesn't always work well with. Is so the movie High Tension, not trying to spoil too much about it, but basically at the end we find out that everything that was happening in that movie, the killer was actually the protagonist the entire time,
Yeah.
And so that sounds like I just gave a heavy spoiler. You'll just have to see the movie more to see what I mean.
I don't think it spoils High Tension so much as because I think High Tension is an experience beyond just its spoiler. I think it's a film you do need to experience within the moment. It's like somebody can spoil Memento or even like I want to say like a Usual Suspects and whatnot, but you still want to watch how it happens. So I think you're
there. and like that's what I mean is that this device of the person lying about what happened in their flashback has evolved into the killer purposely lying about his flashback so nobody would catch on to his or her, killings. And so, again, that's also very specific of how it's evolved. That's not the only way of how it's been used. But coming back to Stage Fright, coming back to the fact that he did lie about it, it's something that is so normal now to see that I would have loved to have been back then just to hear that criticism of just like, what the fuck?
Matt, we can go over to Bosley Crowther's house together and we can just smack him around a little bit. It's totally fine. Like, time travel is totally cool now, and we can totally do it. I have no problem having you come and help me smack some critics around. That'd be just wonderful and dandy. But so anyway, to wrap it up, he basically confesses to not only killing the husband and claiming that Charlotte goaded him on to do it, which it's arguable that she did because of the way Charlotte's been acting, but also that he killed a girl prior and got off on self-defense. And she says, well, you could, they take care of you because you're clearly insane. And he says, like, no, not unless I killed a third person with no intention or reason. And then that would be insane, right? And we get this image of Johnny played brilliantly in this scene by Richard Todd as basically a Norman Bates prototype where he snaps and loses it. And she tricks him enough to get him outside of the carriage and towards the stage door, and then she quickly locks the door in front of her and isolates him. The police corner him. He tries to escape, and the safety curtain in the theater drops and kills Jonathan Cooper in a scene that obviously you're never going to get away with this in the 50s, but I would have loved to have seen the safety curtain crush Jonathan to end his abusive reign of terror. But again, we're talking about, things we're never going to see because, Zach, they wouldn't allow that shit. You just have to get over that fact. Like, the Hollywood will never be what you want it to be. But then we see Smith and Eve walk off, and that's the end of the movie, an Alfred Hitchcock production. The film's response was were very mixed. Bosley Crowther, my favorite man to hate, wrote that Hitchcock and his writers have contrived to give a fine cast of actors some slick and entertaining things to do, but we must quietly advise you that these things, while amusing separately, build up very little sustained excitement or suspense. They are simply a wild accumulation of clever, colorful episodes, tending for the most part to be comic, without any real anxiety. And as you discussed with your reviews that you looked into and everything, some critics felt a little tricked by the flashback reveal to be a fake. So I basically, when we look at this film, it's interesting how it sets up a lot of horror tropes that we see down the line. Even though Hitchcock himself considers them failures, it's arguable to say that this is an instance where Hitchcock does something that doesn't quite work and that he never does again, but that other filmmakers then go on to perfect, which is something that I think that has been a little bit different from other things where he would later perfect them himself. And I don't know, like that's basically the end of Stage Fright. Matt, do you have anything to part with on this in terms of how you felt about watching this film? Because it's not the traditional what we think of Hitchcock for the suspense and thriller realm. It's a little bit of a different bag.
I would say that, if you're just fascinated by Hitchcock, you're going to love this movie for the fact that it is one of Hitchcock's more unique takes on making a film. But if you are also a fan of horror and you love horror and you've always just kind of wondered where it got a little bit its footing from, where it got its influence from, and you want to know how it got some of that influence from Hitchcock, starting with this movie is a great place to start because it has so many themes that are now normal, that we now expect to see. Obviously, they're contextualized and adapted in different ways, but if we can, I said before on our show, I always say it again, art can take on a separate life from the person who creates it. Fact of the matter is that when we see movies and we want to go and experience a movie, we want to feel something. Whether that is we want to feel terrified of a killer in the darkness, or the explosions that blow up and give us that excitement, or even the romance of True Love's First Kiss. We want to experience something. So when we do experience frustration of feeling lied to, in this sense quite literally, and feeling like we were fooled, I think there in itself is a testament to how great a movie and how great an art form is. Because art makes you feel something. Art gets you to respond. And if you respond with positively or frustration with it, then you can't argue that it's not a good piece of art. Is it your favorite piece of art? Sure, probably not. But it's still a poignant one. And even in general, if you just like film, this is definitely something that's going to be worth your time. It is a little lengthy, without a doubt. But if you got time to kill, if you're stuck inside because of the epidemic, seriously, Stage Fright is one of those movies that will fall to the wayside. It will be forgotten about if we let it.
Right. No, absolutely. And on that note, Matt, I want to thank you for coming back on board to chat with us about some Hitchcock and to chat about a film that I don't think many people tend to dive into, and I'm glad we were able to dive into it as much as we were able to today.
Absolutely.
And then really quickly, give us a plug for some punk rock horror podcasts. I want to hear it out your mouth.
Yeah, so if you know what our show is, then you already know my whole spiel. But if I've enticed you to check us out in any way, you can do that you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Just search up Punk Rock Horror Podcast on Facebook and Twitter at official PRHP. We also have an Instagram, Punk Rock Horror Podcast over there as well. And I have an Instagram too if you want to follow me personally at TheUndeadMatt. We have content literally everywhere. We're on iTunes, iHeart, Spotify. We have a website, www.punkrockhorrorpodcast.com. We have a best of playlist on Spotify, so if you don't know where to jump into with our content, we recommend that you go there, just hit shuffle and skip or listen as needed until so you can get an idea of who we are. And seriously, thank you, man, for bringing me on again. Thank you for asking me to come back. I do genuinely value it when somebody does actually look out to me and Cody for our expertise, because we said it on the show, and this is something we never lie about, is that we've watched horror literally our entire lives. My first walk into it was with a mixture of Twilight Zone, Tales from the Crypt, and then eventually Stephen King's It. And it's something that I loved my entire life. And so whenever I get to, and when Cody does also get to be brought in to talk about it and just give our little expertise on it, it means the world to us. So thank you.
Oh, not at all. I'm glad that you were able to take the time to do it, and I greatly appreciate you bringing your perspective onto this, because this is a film that I think sets up a lot of tropes that don't play themselves out the way we normally see them today, but it is a film that requires someone to come in and really talk about, like, okay, like, well, this and this end up becoming this down the line. And again, what's interesting about it is that it's not Hitchcock perpetuating the perfection of it. It ends up being something that others do down the line to a greater effect. So that's going to do it for this episode of the Shamley Silhouette. You can find more episodes of the Shamley Silhouette at realnerdspodcast.com. You can find us every week now as we get to the end of this series. They'll be coming up on the website first, and then they will be released on the iTunes feed. But until next time, good night.
It's not 'cause I wouldn't, it's not 'cause I shouldn't, and you know it's not 'cause I couldn't, it's simply because I'm the laziest cat